Bard on the Plains podcast with Mike McPeek. It's about stories, mine and yours.
Anybody who takes the time to look at the how often I release episodes, you'll see that I don't do it on any sort of a frequent basis. And that seems to be one of the rules of podcasting, is release episodes on a regular basis so you can maintain your audience. That's probably good advice, but I would rather release something when I have something to say and figure out the right way to say it. And so I've been meaning to do this episode for a while because it's very important to me, but I just couldn't quite figure out the right hook to make it interesting. And I was laying in bed this morning. I guess it finally came to me how I wanted to do this. I think it's better that I had waited to do this one. And I'm going to be talking about my anniversary today, not my wedding anniversary. That's a very important date to me also. And for anybody who's curious, my wedding anniversary is June 5th, 1982. So next year it'll be 40 years that I've been married to my wife. But the anniversary I want to talk about today is what I call my Nerdiversary. It is 10/9/81, October 9th, 1981. That is the day that I took the next step up in my nerddom. It's when I bought my first computer. And that's something that's very important to me, second only to my wedding anniversary. Because that's one of those points in your life when you feel like your life has changed. It's taking kind of a new direction. Now, I've always been a nerd. In high school, I was that kid for a brief period of time. I had a pocket protector. I have and still have slide rules, and I know how to use them. When I was in junior high, nothing excited me more than graph paper and a mechanical pencil. So yes, I am a nerd through and through. And I've also seen the inside of a few lockers in my high school days too. So yeah, I'm a bona fide, dyed-in-the-wool nerd, and I state that proudly. But my nerddom took went up another level when I bought my first computer. And I can tell you exactly what it is because I still own it to this day and I have it. It was a Radio Shack color computer back before they became Tandy. And I remember buying that thing. I was going to Lake Area Vocational Technical Institute in Watertown that's since changed its name to Lake Area Technical College. I'll never get used to it because to me it'll always be LAVTI. But I was a student there, my second year of ag production, and I went into Radio Shack, and I saw that they were selling computers. Now, back then, that was one of those things. I think I've mentioned it on my an episode or two about my science teacher in high school would bring in this phone hookup, remote computer terminal that you would access a mainframe through a telephone line. That was my first exposure, real exposure to computers outside of seeing science fiction's view of computers on Star Trek and all the other science fiction shows. So that was my first exposure to a real computer. I thought, boy, this stuff was really neat. It was really good. And I saw the potential for it. Well, then I walked into Radio Shack and they were selling a computer there. And I'm thinking, wow, I've been hearing more about these home computer things. And I saw one there right in front of my eyes. And I said, I got to have it. So I bought it. And, you always remember your first. This had 16K of memory. That is 16,000 bits. Smartwatches today have more than that. Calculators, the algebra calculators have more memory than that. Lots of things have more memory than my first computer. But, I thought it was the neatest thing in the world. And it didn't have a GUI interface, or for you non-nerds out there, a graphical user interface. You had to type everything in on a command line, and it run a special version of Microsoft's BASIC, or of MS-DOS BASIC. I think they called it Extended BASIC. And so you had to type things in, type programs in to run them. And there was no the mass storage device when I bought it was a tape recorder, a cassette tape recorder. That was the only way you could save anything that you were working on. Floppy drives weren't they were a thing, but they were quite expensive. And there was no other way to store it. So you would put a cassette tape in, and you'd record it. And if you could back up and record over it, but you'd want to make sure that you were recording over something that you didn't want. It was all in a very serial manner. You had to go from one end to the other. It wasn't, no random access here. You had to find the place on the tape where you wanted to save stuff and make sure it was the right spot and save it. So saving stuff was kind of a hassle. And that was the same way you had to load programs, was to put a cassette tape in there and load it. But this also had another way of loading programs. It had a cartridge slot on the side, and you could play games with it that way too. But there was a few programs on cartridges. One of them, I'm forgetting what the name of it is now, but it was a very simple spreadsheet program. And about all you could do was add, multiply, subtract, and divide, and not much more beyond that. But I still thought this was, the greatest thing in the world, because if you could put stuff in there. So I started doing simple bookkeeping stuff, so I could at least add stuff up, and as you added things, the total would change, so you wouldn't have to re-add everything. So, I thought that was, a pretty great thing to have. And I spent a lot of time with that computer. Even when I was going to Votech, there'd be some times that I would, we had an hour for lunch at school, so instead of eating at the cafeteria, I would run home quick, maybe grab a sandwich or something, just make a simple quick lunch, and then I would sit down and start playing with the computer and doing different things. And it became kind of an obsession with me. And I can remember the first printer I bought for it. It was a printer plotter is what it actually was. It wasn't a dot matrix printer. It was a plotter, not unlike, I think the modern version would be like a Cricut machine. That the Cricut machine cuts out your stencils and stuff on paper. But this, you could put 4 different color pens in there, and it could sit there and it could draw and plot stuff. And so when you were printing out something, you weren't like a dot matrix printer where it was just hitting all the dots. It was actually writing out the words that you put in there, or its printing was to just go through and you could do multicolor printing with it, but you had to have the right software. And what you would do is you would draw and you could only use 4 colors because that's all the colored pens you had. So you would print out one color, it would wind back to the beginning, you'd swap out your pen, put your other pen in, and it would draw again with the second color, and you keep doing that, and that's how you made a picture with that. So, but that back then, that was fancy because, color printing wasn't a thing yet. It was all black and white and it was dot matrix. So, that was a really, cool deal to have. Well, then eventually I did save up some money, and I did get a floppy disk drive for this. It used 160K floppies. And the first floppy drive that I had, you could only write on one side of that floppy disk. It wasn't dual-sided disk drive. But what a lot of people figured out was, now these were the 5 1/4 inch floppies. I don't know if a lot of people have even seen, people nowadays have seen them, but they were 5 1/4 inch, and they were literally a floppy drive, or floppy disk, because they weren't hard-shelled like the 3 1/2 inch ones were. These were, you could sit there and they would kind of flop up and down, kind of like a piece of vinyl, which is in essence what they were. Vinyl with magnetized medium in the middle that you could write stuff to with your disk drive. Well, somebody figured out on those things there was a pilot hole, because these drives, you had to make sure that they were spinning at the right speed so that you would read your information properly. Otherwise, it would be all garbled. So they had this pilot hole in there so that it would be timed right. And occasionally, maybe your timing would be off, or you were starting to get more read-write errors. So what you would do is you take your case off, and there on the drive inside was a checkerboard wheel. A wheel had a checkerboard design on it. And what you would do is you would take a fluorescent light, which strobes at 60 beats per second, and you would hold that over this checkerboard design as the drive was spinning, and you had a speed control knob there, and you would slowly adjust the speed until the checkerboard stood still the effect was that the checkerboard stood still while the drive was spinning, and then you knew you had it timed correctly. Well, so these floppy drives had this little pilot hole so that you could do the timing thing. Well, somebody figured out that if you took a paper punch and punched out the vinyl on the opposite side, you could then take the disc out and flip it over and write on the back side, so you could have information on two sides instead of just one. Now, you could only access one side at a time, but you were still doubling the amount of storage that you had on that disc. So when I got that, then all things became even better, because then I could just be saving stuff all the time, and instead of it was a lot easier to access information, because then it was random access. So you could go to any place on the drive and get the information that you want. You didn't have to wind to a certain point and then press your play button and have the computer start listening to the cassette tape. And every once in a while, it would have problems. The disk drive the directory would get scrambled because something may have gotten miswritten on there, and you would lose your information. Well, eventually somebody figured out that all the information for your files are stored in this one data access table. And that is probably what would get screwed up more likely than any of your information getting screwed up. So somebody figured out that you could go in there, find that particular file and edit it and fix it so then you could read your information. I did that more than a couple times on diskettes I wanted to get information off of. So, this is the early days of computing. You kind of had to learn to hack a little bit and do a little bit of work for yourself. And because, we didn't have a lot of money and there wasn't a lot of techs back then to work on this stuff. So you learned to be resourceful and you learned to do all this other stuff. Well, after I got that disk drive, I got a little bit more. I saved up some money, and there was an alternate operating system that came out for it that was called OS 9. Now, at this point, I want to make the point for all the Mac people out there. This is not the same OS 9 that showed up on the Macintosh computers. This was a different one. This was made by Microware out of Iowa. But it was a alternate operating system that you put your floppy drive into your computer and you boot up to it, and it had an alternate operating system. And this one, they started to put they were working on the basic underlyings of a graphical operating system with this thing. But the thing I liked most about this operating system was that it was a true multitask or multi-user operating system, whereas the original extended BASIC that came with the color computer, only one person could use it at one time and only run one program at a time. This OS 9, you could have several programs running, so you could jump from one to the other. And it was based on the Unix language for any computer nerds out there who knows what that means. But it was basically set up to be multi-user, multi-program operating system. And I learned a few things on there. I learned some interesting stuff that you could take the output of one program and send it into the input of another program. And, that idea kind of intrigued me, where you could take, you could have one program that would sort a list and then send it to another program that would print it, or you could do other things with it. And so that kind of spurred my imagination. I found that kind of interesting. And then they had a computer language that you could load and use on there called Basic 09, which was a combination of the basic computer programming language that a lot of people were familiar with. And, BASIC was the first real consumer-oriented programming language that everybody could use. And it was pretty good. You could do a lot of things with it once you kind of figured out what you're doing. And it was written so that the average person could understand it. But, there was some weaknesses to the operating system, or to that system, what you could do with it. Well, what Basic 09 did was it started adding more functionality to it, like lists and structured lists and different data types, so you could store information in different formats and be able to access it different ways. And it gave you a lot of opportunities. So I kind of fooled around with this, and I kind of wanted to do a little programming language, but I could never quite figure out what it is I wanted to program. I kind of needed a goal before I, started programming. I needed a goal to work towards, not just sit down there and noodle with it. But I did learn a few things. I found it rather interesting. But, eventually time moves on and things get better. And then Radio Shack, then they changed their name then to Tandy. So the next computer I bought, I skipped over the Color Computer 2 because there really wasn't much difference in the system than the original one that I had. But then I bought the Color Computer 3, and that was a big leap forward because that had 64K of memory. Now, it said 64K of memory, but that was with a caveat. The way the memory was structured in there, I think what I've heard in the after a little lately, I've heard that the reason why you could only access half the RAM in that computer was because Tandy was buying these computer chips that may have had half of the memory modules were bad. So instead of saying it was 64K, they would give you 64K, but you could only access half of it at a time. And there were some reasons why they did that. I never quite understood what it was, but some smart people figured out how you could use the other half of the 64K of memory for like a RAM drive. So instead of having to write information back and forth to a floppy drive, which was kind of slow, you could use the other half of that memory as a RAM drive, or we would think of it now as an SD card or a USB drive, but it was it wasn't a spinning drive type of storage. It was actual memory, which was faster, and you could access things better that way. But I moved up to that, and I use that computer quite a bit, and I still have that one too. But eventually, Radio Shack quit making computers. They weren't able to compete, and then at that point, there was a lot of computer systems around at that time. There was the Adam Coleco, you had the Texas Instrument computers, you had the Commodore computers, and Tandy kind of dropped out early, but then the rest of these started to fall off, and I basically went from the Tandy computer to then I bought a MS-DOS computer. And I think I had that up to eventually DOS 6.1, which was the last iteration of that operating system that they had. And along the way, then they started experimenting with GUIs for that. I had... I don't remember, I'm forgetting the name of the one now, but it'd give you a point-and-click interface that you could use over top of DOS, and it worked over top of DOS. It didn't replace it, but it worked over top, so it would give you that point-and-click interface to run programs. I thought that was really cool. But then about that time, Windows 3.1 came out, and that started dominating the market, and so, I switched to that and started using it. And I think I have gone through every iteration of the Windows programs after 3.1 and beyond. I never tried Windows 1.0, but I had all the rest of them, even Vista, which was a kind of a joke amongst the computing community. And I remember Windows ME. That was a colossal mess. I have a computer friend who worked on these kind of computers, and he says, this is an apocryphal story that he relates, but he claims that somebody he knew did a clean install of the Windows ME operating system, and left it alone and didn't do anything else with it, just let it run. And eventually the system corrupted itself and died, so it was not a real good operating system. But, along the way, I experimented with a few other computers and messed around with them a little bit. My father-in-law went down the Commodore route, so I would play with his computers and mess around with them. And the Commodores, they were an interesting group of computers. The difference between their floppy drives and the Tandy floppy drives was that the Tandy hard drives used a serial, or they used a parallel port, so it could write and read information going both ways simultaneously, whereas the Commodore information ports were serial. They could only send one bit of information at a time, and they could only receive one bit of information at a time, so that they were slower. But they had some interesting stuff, and they were fun to play around with. And after my father-in-law passed away, I inherited his computer, so I have a Timex Sinclair, which was an interesting early computer too. And then he had a regular Commodore 64, and then he had one that was a little bit more of a rarity and possibly a little bit more of a collector's item. He had one called the SX64, which was really one of the first portable computers. I think we laughingly refer to them as luggables, because they were probably about I don't know, maybe about 15, 20 pounds. They were kind of heavy, but they had the computer, a small little monitor, and a disk drive with a keyboard all built into a metal case that you could carry around. And I suppose it was probably about 18, maybe 20 inches long, probably about 10 inches wide, and probably about 6 inches deep. I'm going by memory here, so I could be completely wrong. And the front of the case would flip down. That's where your keyboard was at, and there was a small 6-inch screen in there that you looked at. Nowadays it seems, laughable, but back then, that was just awesome, because you could, instead of being tied to a desk and a monitor, and you could pick this up and carry it with you. Now, you still had to have a plug-in, and you had to have like a sturdy desk to hold it, because like I said, it was kind of heavy. But, it was the first taste of being able to, go mobile with this stuff. And, I was fascinated by that. But, since then, I've moved along. I have used Windows, and then I kind of became frustrated with Windows because of the way the problems it was having, and also kind of Windows was going through this monopolistic stage where they were going to control everything, and a lot of us nerds don't like to be told what to do, and so there was some pushback against Windows. And about that time, there was this other operating system that emerged called Linux. And I got into that, and I started messing around with that. I was, pretty somewhat early in the Linux revolution, I guess you call it. I wasn't one of the first people to use it. I mean, there was a lot of nerds before me that used it. But when I came along, it was still early days for the consumer side of Linux. It was so early. Linux installs programs with what it calls it's different names for different distributions, but basically it's a program manager that will download the program for you. And the thing with any computer program, some disguise it or deal with it, in different ways. But Linux, a lot of stuff depended upon libraries that you had to download, which would contain subroutines and information that the program needed to use. and those had to be managed because they would change and stuff. Well, modern Linux program managers will take care of all those dependencies for you, make sure all your libraries are current and everything. Well, when I was doing it, there wasn't anything like that. So you would download your program, you'd try to install it, it would say, oh, it's missing this library or that library. So then I would have to go out on the internet, and I was still using dial-up at that time, I believe, or maybe I had made the move to high-speed internet, which was faster than dial-up, but nothing compared to what we have now. And I would go out there and try to find the right library that this program would need. And sometimes you couldn't find the right one, but you'd find one that was just like, oh, maybe, one number in the version number off. That's got to be close enough. So I would download it and try it, and sometimes it would work. And then sometimes it would just go, this isn't right, and sometimes it would just wiggle, wobble, and fall down. And I got really good at installing Linux or doing Linux installations because I would just screw the operating system up so bad I would just say, to heck with it, I'll just wipe it out and start over again. Sometimes that was easier than just trying to fix the problem. And I do remember one of the first times I was experimenting with Linux, my wife and I were sharing a computer, so she was using Windows and I was experimenting with this weirdo hippie Linux stuff. And I didn't realize what I was doing, and I kind of accidentally ended up erasing the Windows partition, and she lost all her emails. She was not real happy with me, and then that was when we decided, for the sake of marital bliss, we would all have our own separate computers. It was a lot better that way. And yes, I went still screwed up my installations, and I erased some stuff, and I lost a few things, but it was all a learning process. And but about that time too, the guy that I had mentioned about the installing Windows ME, he kind of got me hooked on the OS X operating system for Macintosh. And that was about the time that Macintosh switched from the PowerPC processors that they were using to the Intel processors, the same ones that Windows used. And some smart people out there figured out that you could install the Mac operating system on non-Apple hardware. And so he kind of got me hooked on that, and you'd have to go out and research it because it wasn't just straightforward. Sometimes you had to fiddle with things. You would have to download a special... There's people out there tweaking the Mac operating system and making a new download out of it that would work on specific hardware. And you'd have to find a specific motherboard. You'd have to make sure a specific graphic card and kind of make sure that all the parts kind of lined up so that this operating system would work. And even then, it wasn't a guarantee. And then you would have to go in there and fiddle with things. I got really good, or decently good, at manipulating what the Mac OS calls a plist file, a preference list file. And you'd have to go in there and tweak a few things to tell it to use the right driver or something. And again, sometimes it would crash and burn. But I actually built several Hackintosh computers, as they were called. And I actually got them to work fairly good. There was a few times I had to remind myself not to do an update because that would probably break something. But overall, it gave me a chance to taste the Mac operating system and work with it. And then among my old computer collection here, I also bought a G4 Mac. It was... Boy, I don't remember which one it was now. They had different code names for them so you could differentiate. And I want to say mine was a Sawtooth, but I might be wrong. And that one I upgraded and put in a different processor. And I should have maybe went with a dual processor, but I got one that had more processing speed to it. And I upgraded that one. And I still have it here. I just don't want to get rid of it because there is something kind of special about that. And then I also inherited a clamshell Power Mac laptop from somebody. I have that here just because it's a novel thing. I have all these computers around here, and I wished I had some place to display them or something to do with them because they're interesting. I just don't want to get rid of them. The nerd in me says, hey, these things are, they're cool. They're important. They're from the early days of computing. And I think it would be really interesting for people nowadays who take all this stuff for granted to see where we started and where we came from and how it's all progressed. But so now we're more into modern computing, and I'm still a nerd. Some people think I'm just weird. Whatever, I don't care. I mean, at this point, if they were saying we have a list for people who want to become cyborg, I would sign up because I do love my tech. If you were to meet me on the street now, on one wrist I wear an Apple watch, on the other wrist I wear a Fitbit because they both offer things for me that the other one doesn't, and it just fills niches in my life. I wear a Aftershockz bone conducting headset on my head a lot of the times because it gives me that freedom to listen to things when I want, but they don't go in the ears, so I can hear if somebody's talking to me without having to pull earbuds out or do anything like that. I have probably a weird or abnormal number of digital assistants around the house. Here I have both the Google and the Amazon ones, and whenever I'm podcasting here, I have to be very careful not to say their names because then they will be chiming in and trying to hone in on my podcast here. But, I just, and for somebody like me, this podcast is supposed to be about Bard on the Plains. It's supposed to be about growing up on the plains of South Dakota. But to me, this is part of the growing up on the plains of South Dakota. For me, it was a transition from the pre-digital age to the digital age in kind of the same way that my dad made the transition from farming with horses to tractors, and he didn't even live to see where modern agriculture has gone now with precision farming. And I think that would have been something that he would have really been into, would be the precision farming, because he was very much concerned about conservation and taking care of the land, but he was also frugal and trying not to waste money. So I think if he could go out there and had a system that would pinpoint pesticides and would pinpoint fertilizer and try to cut down on costs as much as possible and try to raise the best crops possible, I think he'd be all over it. But and so my dad was a nerd of a different sort. They weren't called nerds, but he was somebody that liked to know stuff, liked to figure things out, liked to experiment, liked to do different things. And of course, I picked that up, and now I'm what I call a bona fide nerd, a geek, if you will. Somebody just likes technology, likes all this stuff. But so for me, it's this transition, and just growing up on the plains of South Dakota, it gave me, I guess technology gave me that freedom because I live out here in what some people would call no man's land, or maybe a technological no man's land. The internet and everything that's come along with it has given me the ability to do this podcast, to put it out there for other people to hear, to meet other people from around the world, to open my experiences. And so I'm just not this what some people would say would call a redneck hick or something with a limited worldview and backwards ideas. I'm somebody that now I can be exposed to all different ideas, even if they irritate the crap out of me. I have to learn to try to understand what the people are saying and make sense of it, and not just discard it because it doesn't agree with my worldview. But it has challenged me to think and grow and accept and do things, and I think that's what the point I'm trying to make with this podcast today is that even though I live on South Dakota, I try to embrace the tech. I try to understand what's going on around me. And I have incorporated into my life more so than most normal people will, but, it's what I do. Some people, go out to bars. Some people are sports fans. Some people, this is my hobby. This is my lifestyle, I guess, if you will. And so, I've embraced it. And I just don't let the fact that, I'm out here in South Dakota, not in Silicon Valley or, some other high-tech area. I just try to embrace the tech and, live it, love it, and grow with it, and just be who I am. And I have the internet to thank for that, and computers and everything else. And then, I guess to just wrap it up, I guess I think that all this technology, while it does have its downside and can cause problems, but it's changing the world for better or worse. We're going to have to learn with it, just like my dad embraced the transition from horses to tractors, and you have to embrace that and grow with it and learn to accept it and make the most of it. So, this is, like I say, this is my Nerdiversary. And, I'm just going to keep on doing what I always do, and I'll see where technology takes me, and hopefully it will be in the right direction. If you like this episode, please leave a review on the podcast service of your choice, or please tell your friends and family about it. Or if you want to comment, leave a voice message at anchor.fm/bardontheplains/message. If I like it, I might use it on a future podcast. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter at bardontheplains, or on Facebook at facebook.com/McPeek Podcasts, the home for all my podcasts. If you want to email me, you can send it to bardontheplains@gmail.com. And don't forget to visit bardontheplains.com for show notes and more information. If you want to find out about the other podcasts that I do, please go to McPeekPodcasting.com to see the other shows I am doing, like Holding Out for a Hero. And if you want to see the other projects I'm working on, such as photography and blogging, head over to mike-mcpeek.com to check it out. I thank you for listening, and I hope you have a story of your own to tell.